I still remember the exact sound the monitor made when they wheeled him in. It wasn't screaming, it wasn't beeping, it wasn't doing anything at all. And that silence was the hook that caught my attention before anyone said a word. I've worked enough shifts to know that silence in an ER can be worse than any alarm. Because alarms tell you that a patient is fighting. Silence tells you the patient has already lost. Before I even reached the stretcher, one of the paramedics looked at me with the kind of expression we all try to hide during calls, but can't always control. He didn't say it out loud, but his eyes did. We're probably too late. And yet, the fact that they brought him in meant they hadn't given up. If they haven't given up, neither do we. That's the rule. He looked young. Too young. Not a teenager, but maybe early 30s. Athletic build, calloused hands, work boots still on his feet. Not the kind of man you expect to see with a sheet partially covering his chest as someone continues compressions. They had started CPR on the ambulance floor around 15 minutes ago. Too long. Way too long. But I've seen stranger things happen in this place, and sometimes the dead aren't as dead as they look. Unresponsive male, found collapsed at a construction site, one of the medics said as they pushed him toward the trauma bay. No pulse on arrival. CPR ongoing. Shock advised once. No conversion. Asystole since. Asystole. The flat line. The one rhythm that gives us almost nothing to work with. The one that feels like the universe quietly saying no. But I wasn't ready to accept that. I jumped in immediately. I didn't ask how long he'd been down until after we were already treating him. Asking too early feels like giving up. Like you're framing the ending before the story even begins. He was pale. His skin was cooling. His pupils didn't react to the bright overhead light. But I've learned something that has kept me going in this job. Sometimes a body is slower than you think at giving up. And sometimes the heart just needs one last reason to try again. We transferred him to our bed, my hands already moving out of habit, out of muscle memory, out of years of doing this again and again. I took over compressions for the medic, feeling the sternum depress under my palms. His chest didn't rise on its own. His lungs were still. But that didn't matter. I started counting in my head. 21, 22, 23. We cut his clothes off quickly. Scissors sliding through fabric, revealing his chest. Tattoos. Scars from what looked like old injuries. A man who worked hard, lived hard, fought hard. Maybe, just maybe, he still had some fight left. The doctor entered the room like a storm, barking out orders as if the patient were still fully alive and listening. Epi now. Let's get that line in. He glanced at the monitor even though there was nothing to glance at, just a straight, calm, uncaring line. He tapped the top of it like it might magically change if he annoyed it enough. Any shocks advised? No rhythm to shock, I said between compressions. Then keep going. I kept going. CPR is strange. The world shrinks. Sounds blur. Everything becomes motion, pressure, timing. For a moment, you forget who you are, what day it is, how long you've been on your feet. You become a machine, trying to force life back into a body that's forgotten how to hold it. Another nurse got an airway in. Someone else took over compressions for me. I stepped back for a second, catching my breath, watching his chest rise and fall artificially under the bag valve mask. Still no pulse, still no electrical activity. Nothing. I looked at his face. Something about him tugged at me. Maybe it was because he reminded me of people I grew up with, people who worked themselves to exhaustion because they didn't have a choice. People who carried the world on their shoulders and didn't complain. The doctor looked at the clock. How long has it been? The medic answered. CPR for roughly 23 minutes now. That was bad. Very bad. Survival rates at that point are barely more than a whisper. Let's go another round, the doctor said anyway. We continued. More compressions, more epi, More hope mixed with desperation disguised as protocol. 30 minutes passed, then 35. His body stayed still, unmoved, indifferent. Around the 40-minute mark, the room started to shift in tone. You can feel it when people begin silently accepting what's coming. It's not that they stop trying, they just stop believing. But for some reason, I didn't. There was something unsettling about him, something that made my chest feel tight. I've seen people die, hundreds of them, but I rarely feel anything during CPR. You don't have time to. This time, though, I felt something. This creeping unease. Not sadness, not dread. Something like unfinished business. We paused compressions for a rhythm check. Still flatline. The doctor took a breath. I could hear the weight of the decision building inside him. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's..." "Wait," I said before I even realized I was speaking. Everyone turned. I don't know. Just give it one more minute. Just one more." The doctor hesitated. Maybe he thought I knew something he didn't. Maybe he saw the look in my eyes and decided that was enough. "One more minute," he agreed. I took over compressions again. Hard. Deep. My arms started to burn. Sweat ran down my back. Each push felt like slamming against the door of a house that refused to open. But I wasn't stopping. At 44 minutes, something happened. It was so small at first that I thought I imagined it. A faint electrical flicker on the monitor. A little bump. More like a glitch than a heartbeat. Everyone leaned closer. "Is that..." the doctor said. "Continue compressions," he ordered immediately. And I did. Another flicker, then another. This time louder, clearer, like a hesitant breath from someone waking from a nightmare. The monitor beeped. Once. Then again. We stopped compressions. A rhythm appeared. Weak, slow, but real. A nurse yelled, "I feel a pulse. Faint, but it's there." And for a moment, just a moment, the whole room froze. Even the doctor looked genuinely shocked. Nobody expected this. Nobody. I watched the small green line rise and fall, like a miracle on a screen. He was alive. Against every number, every statistic, every medical probability, he was alive. The doctor shook his head and whispered, "I don't understand. Not after this long." But I wasn't confused, because that feeling inside me, the one that wouldn't let me give up, it grew stronger the moment his pulse returned. And that was the moment I realized something was wrong. Really deeply wrong. Because if a patient comes back after almost 45 minutes of CPR, something else always comes with them. Something we don't talk about. Something nobody trains us for. And whatever it wasn't finished with him yet. But that moment, when the pulse returned, didn't feel like victory. Not to me. The air in the room shifted in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was tension, the kind that presses against your ribs and makes your instincts whisper that something isn't right. I looked at his face again, the same man who had come in cold and empty, and suddenly he looked different. Not alive, just present in a way he hadn't been before. We stabilized him as quickly as possible. Intubated, IVs everywhere, machines humming around him like a mechanical cocoon keeping him tethered to this world. His rhythm was still weak, barely a thump under my fingers when I checked again. But it was there, stubborn and slow, like someone knocking from very far away. The doctor stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Get him to CT," he said, but even his voice sounded unsure. I wasn't the only one who felt it, that strange heaviness in the room, like we'd crossed some invisible line we weren't meant to cross. We moved him swiftly down the hall. His stretcher wheels echoed in a way that felt too loud for such a quiet corridor. As we turned a corner, I swear I felt the temperature change. Just a breeze, barely noticeable, brushing across my neck like something cold following behind us. I told myself it was just the air conditioning. It usually is. But this time, I wasn't so sure. We reached CT, and as we waited for the machine to be ready, I stood beside him, checking his lines, making sure everything was connected properly. His eyelids twitched, just once. A tiny flicker, like the shadow of a reflex. I leaned closer, watching. Nothing. No new movement, no trace of consciousness. Just silence again. The tech gestured to me. "We're good. Send him in." While the scan began, I stayed close, watching the monitor. The rhythm looked bizarre, too slow, too irregular, like his heart hadn't decided whether it wanted to stay alive or quit halfway. I'd never seen a pattern like it. It felt undecided, not medically wrong, just unnervingly unpredictable. When the scan finished, we transferred him back to the stretcher. As we started rolling him toward the hallway, something odd happened. His hand slipped off the side of the bed. Not dramatically, just gravity pulling dead weight downward. But when it hit the rail, his fingers curled inward for a brief second, like a reflex. The tech jumped. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," I said, though I wasn't sure what I thought I saw. "Is he waking up?" "No," I replied too quickly. "Not yet." And yet the image kept repeating in my mind. Those fingers curling, even though we all knew his brain had gone without oxygen for nearly 45 minutes. Reflexes shouldn't be firing like that. Back in the trauma room, the doctor reviewed the CT scan. He frowned deep, the kind of frown that starts in the brain before it makes its way to the skin. "No hemorrhage," he muttered. "No trauma, no signs of stroke, nothing that explains all this." Then he said something I'll never forget. "He shouldn't have come back. Not, most people don't. Not, it's rare. He shouldn't have come back." His words echoed inside me as I cleaned up the room. I kept glancing over at the man, motionless again, his heart tracing uncertain lines on the screen. I didn't like watching him. I didn't like turning my back to him either. It felt like he was going to do something, even though he was supposed to be deeply unconscious. After we transferred him to the ICU, I thought maybe the feeling would fade. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe I was just tired. I told myself I was being dramatic, but things only got stranger. Hours passed, and every so often, the ICU nurses would call down to the ER, asking if we had noticed anything unusual about him. "Unusual how?" we asked. "He moves sometimes," one nurse said. "Little things. Fingers. Lips. Like he's trying to talk." But his EEG showed no meaningful activity. His brain should have been quiet enough that those movements made no sense. During my break, I walked upstairs to check on him myself. I don't normally do that for patients unless something about them gets stuck in my mind. And he was definitely stuck there. When I walked into his room, the lights were dim, machines glowing softly, pumping measured breaths into his lungs. I approached slowly, almost cautiously. I'm not afraid of patients. But this one felt like standing beside a closed door, wondering what waits on the other side. I checked his vitals, stable enough. Then I looked at his face. His eyelids twitched again. I leaned closer. "Can you hear me?" I whispered before realizing how ridiculous that was. He couldn't. He shouldn't. But something in me needed to ask. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his mouth moved. A tiny movement, like lips trying to shape a silent word. I froze. "You saw that too, right?" the ICU nurse asked from the doorway. She'd been watching me, hugging her arms around herself. Yeah, I said. "Does he do that a lot?" "Every hour or so," she said. "Always the same motion, like he's saying something." "What does it look like?" She shook her head, like he's trying to say, wait. That cold breeze I'd felt earlier? It rushed down my spine again. We called the doctor. He came up and examined the patient carefully. Reflex tests, pupillary response, brainstem checks. Nothing explained the movements. Could be random muscle firing, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Hours later, near the end of my shift, the monitor alarm blared from his room, heart rate dropping. I rushed in with 2 others. His rhythm was nosediving, falling from barely enough to almost nothing. We prepared for another code, but then something stopped us in our tracks. His eyes opened. Not fully, just enough for dark irises to show beneath heavy lids. But they weren't unfocused or wandering like you'd expect. They were looking at me, directly at me, with intention. His mouth opened. This time the word was clearer. Wait. A whisper, raspy, barely sound, but unmistakable. I'm right here, I said instinctively, my heart pounding. Wait for what? His chest rose in a strange, uneven way. Not the machine's rhythm. Something else fighting against it. Don't, he breathed. Don't what? Tell me. He swallowed hard, like the effort of breathing and speaking was tearing at him. Don't. Let. Him. His heart monitor spiked suddenly, as if the words had triggered something inside him. Don't let who... Before I could finish, his whole body jerked violently. The monitor shrieked. His brain activity, which had been flat for hours, lit up in a pattern I'd never seen before. We called a full emergency response. The doctor ran in. Nurses surrounded the bed. Someone grabbed the crash cart. His heart rhythm surged and crashed like a storm, the lines on the screen spiking upward, then plummeting downward so violently the machine struggled to keep up. What is happening? One nurse shouted. Seizure? Another suggested. No, I said without thinking. It's not a seizure. Because I was still watching his eyes, and they weren't rolled back, and they weren't twitching. They were wide open, locked on mine, terrified. His lips moved again as the alarm screamed around us. He's... here. Then every monitor in the room shut off at the exact same second. The lights flickered, and the room went ice cold. For a few seconds after the power cut, the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Shallow, uneven, way too fast. The room, once filled with alarms and orders and movement, had gone instantly still. The emergency lights kicked on, dim, red, barely enough to illuminate the outlines of the equipment. Everyone froze. Even the doctor, who had already reached for the defibrillator pads, held completely still, staring at the blank monitors like they had betrayed him. Did we lose power? Someone whispered. No, the charge nurse said, looking out into the hallway. Everything else is still on. And she was right. I stepped to the doorway and saw the hallway lights glowing normally, nurses walking, machines humming. Every other room was fully powered. Ours was the only one drowning in that strange, suffocating red. The patient lay motionless again, his body sinking into the mattress, chest rising and falling only because the ventilator forced it to. But something about him felt different, like whatever had surged through him had left behind static in the air, humming faintly against my skin. The doctor tried turning the monitors back on manually. They stayed black, completely dead. They were fine 2 minutes ago, he muttered. This makes no sense. Then, as if responding to him, the heart monitor lit up again, only it didn't show a rhythm. It showed a single line of text. Wait. A nurse screamed. The doctor stepped back. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. I stared at the word, glowing in the dim emergency light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Is this some kind of glitch? Someone asked. But glitches don't type words, Glitches don't choose commands, and glitches don't match exactly what a patient with no brain activity had whispered minutes before. The word disappeared. The normal monitor screen returned, but the rhythm wasn't normal. It was too perfect, too clean. A steady sinus rhythm that looked like something out of a textbook instead of a man who had been clinically dead for almost 45 minutes. "Check his pulse," the doctor ordered shakily. I was closest. I reached for his wrist. Warm. Not just warm. Hot. Like there was heat radiating from under his skin, pulsing outward in waves that made my fingers tremble. And then I felt it. A pulse. Strong. Too strong. Like his heart had found a rhythm better than before he died. "He's stable," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Stable. After everything. After the impossible. We kept him in the ICU for the rest of my shift. The power in the room flickered twice more, but the monitors stayed on. His brain activity normalized. His breathing pattern evened out. His vitals read like a miracle they'd write about in medical journals, except no one in that room wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to admit what we all saw. I went home that morning exhausted, but wired, my mind replaying every moment. His voice whispering, his eyes locking onto mine. The machine typing, "Wait." The monitors dying all at once. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When I returned that evening for my next shift, the first thing I did was check his chart. Then I went straight to his room. It was empty. He wasn't there. The bed had been stripped. No machines, no patient, nothing. I ran to the nurse's station trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened to the patient from room 214? The cardiac arrest from yesterday?" Everyone looked confused. "Who?" one nurse asked. "The construction worker, young guy. No pulse for 45 minutes. Came back in CT, said he..." I stopped myself. "You have to know who I'm talking about." They all exchanged glances. "There was no patient like that last night," the charge nurse said slowly. "We didn't have any cardiac arrests yesterday." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible. I coded on him for almost an hour." "You must be mixing cases," she insisted gently. "You were on a tough shift. It happens." "No," I said firmly. "He was in this room, right here." She pulled up the bed logs. The room had been listed as unoccupied for the past 2 days. No record of him. No admission. No CT scan. Nothing. I demanded ICU records. Nothing there either. I checked EMS logs. Nothing. It was as if he had never existed. I went back to the empty room. The air felt colder than the hallway again, brushing over my skin the same way it had when we pushed him to CT. I walked slowly inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing too loudly. I found one thing. One single thing that hadn't been cleaned out. On the floor, near the corner where the crash cart had been, was a small piece of medical tape. I picked it up. There was a number written on it, the kind nurses scribble when they're labeling lines quickly. A number that matched the IV we placed during the code. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined him. Proof that someone had been there. Someone had died, lived, spoken, warned us, and then vanished from every system like he was never part of our world. Hours later, as I finished my shift and gathered my things, I passed the ICU hallway one last time. The empty room was dark now, the lights off. As I walked by, something made me glance in. For a split second, I saw him, lying in the bed, eyes open, watching me. I froze. My breath caught. The hallway buzzed around me, nurses talking, carts rolling, machines chirping. But inside that room, everything was silent. I stepped toward the doorway. My pulse hammered in my ears, but when I reached the threshold and flicked the light switch, the bed was empty, perfectly made. No sign of him, no shadow, no impression on the mattress, just an empty room. I stood there, feeling the cold air settle around me like a warning. Wait. The word echoed through my mind again. I don't know who he was. I don't know what brought him back. I don't know what followed him, what he saw on the other side, or who he didn't want reaching us. But I know this. Sometimes people don't just come back. Sometimes something comes back with them. And that day, whatever he returned with still lingers in that room, in my memory, and in the cold that keeps brushing my neck every time I walk past the ICU doors. I still work in that hospital. I still see things I can't explain. But nothing has ever rattled me the way he did. And every time our monitors flicker for no reason, I wonder if he's somewhere nearby, trying to warn us again. Or worse, trying to finish whatever wasn't done. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. It means a lot to me to be able to share moments like this, moments that stay with you, even long after the shift ends. If you like this video, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who enjoys true nurse stories from the ER. It helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you real experiences from behind those hospital doors.